The gunshot pierced the evening air as Jessamine Vickers sprinted through the streets of Brownsville, Texas, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was 1875, and she had made the grave mistake of refusing the advances of Silas Crawford, the richest and most dangerous man in the county. Behind her, Crawford's men shouted, their boots pounding on the dusty road as they pursued her through the small frontier town. Jessamine had arrived in Brownsville just 6 months ago, a young woman of 22 seeking a fresh start after losing her parents to consumption back east. Her skill with a needle had earned her a position as the town's seamstress, but her beauty had drawn unwanted attention from Crawford, who wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. "There she goes!" a gruff voice shouted. "Don't let her get away." Jessamine darted between two buildings, her skirts gathered in her hands as she ran toward the livery stable. She needed a horse needed to escape town before Crawford's men caught her. The stable was dark and quiet as she slipped inside, the scent of hay and horses filling her nostrils. "Miss Vickers?" a deep voice called softly from the shadows. Jessamine nearly screamed, but a warm hand covered her mouth. She found herself staring into the concerned eyes of Thomas Everett, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy who worked for the Rocking H Ranch outside town. She had repaired his shirts on several occasions, and he'd always been polite if somewhat shy. "They're looking for you," he whispered, removing his hand from her mouth. "I heard what happened at the saloon." Crawford tried to. Jessamine couldn't finish the sentence, the memory of the man's wandering hands making her shudder. "I know," Thomas nodded grimly. "He's not a man who takes kindly to rejection." The shouts grew closer. Thomas grabbed a saddle and quickly prepared his chestnut gelding. "You need to get out of town," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'll take you to the ranch. Mr. Henderson won't turn you away." "I can't ask you to get involved," Jessamine protested, even as she heard Crawford's men nearing the livery. Thomas's expression hardened. "You're not asking. I'm offering." He mounted the horse and extended his hand down to her. "Now or never, Miss Vickers." Jessamine hesitated only a moment before grasping his calloused hand and letting him pull her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist as he urged the horse through the back door of the livery, away from the shouts of Crawford's men. They rode hard through the gathering darkness, the town of Brownsville falling away behind them. The vast Texas landscape spread out before them, the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. Jessamine clung to Thomas, her face pressed against his back as the horse galloped across the open country. "They'll follow us," she said when they finally slowed to give the horse a rest. Thomas nodded, his expression grave in the moonlight. "I reckon they will, but Crawford's influence only stretches so far. The Hendersons are good people, they won't hand you over." "Why are you helping me?" Jessamine asked, her voice small against the vastness of the Texas night. Thomas was silent for a long moment. "My sister," he finally said. "Crawford took an interest in her 2 years back. When she refused him, his men." He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "She never recovered from what they did. Took her own life 6 months later." Jessamine felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm night air. "I'm so sorry. It's not your burden to carry," Thomas said. "But I won't let him hurt another woman, not if I can help it." They rode on through the night, the Rocking H Ranch still hours away. Above them, clouds began to gather, obscuring the stars. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain. "Storm's coming," Thomas observed, glancing at the darkening sky. "We should find shelter soon." "Will we make it to the ranch?" Jessamine asked, worry creeping into her voice. "Not tonight. There's an old line shack about an hour's ride from here. We can wait out the storm there." The wind began to pick up as they rode, carrying with it the scent of rain. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed seconds later by a low rumble of thunder. Thomas urged the horse to move faster, and Jessamine held on tighter as they raced the approaching storm. The line shack appeared just as the first heavy drops began to fall, a small, weathered structure barely visible in the darkness. Thomas helped Jessamine dismount before leading the horse to a lean-to shelter beside the cabin. By the time he joined her at the door, rain was falling in earnest, drumming against the roof. The interior of the shack was sparse but dry, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove in one corner, and a narrow cot against the far wall. Thomas lit a lantern he found on the table, casting the room in a warm glow. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it'll keep us dry until morning." "It's perfect," Jessamine assured him, wringing water from her skirts. "Thank you, Mr. Everett." "Thomas," he corrected her with a small smile. "Seems we're past formalities now." He built a fire in the wood stove while Jessamine tried to make herself presentable, combing her fingers through her damp hair. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the small cabin and rain lashing against the windows. "Do you think they're still following us?" she asked, watching Thomas stoke the fire. "Not in this weather," he replied. "Even Crawford's men aren't foolish enough to track us through a storm like this. We'll be safe until morning." Jessamine nodded, though anxiety still knotted in her stomach. She had left everything behind in her hasty escape: her few possessions, her livelihood, the small room above the general store that had been her home. "What will I do now?" she murmured, more to herself than to Thomas. He looked up, his expression softening. "One step at a time. First, we get you safely to the ranch. Mr. Henderson's wife is a kind woman, she'll help you figure things out." The storm raged on, thunder crashing overhead as rain pounded against the roof. Jessamine jumped at particularly loud crash, and Thomas offered her a reassuring smile. "Just nature putting on a show," he said. "This cabin stood through worse." As the night deepened, they shared the meager provisions Thomas carried in his saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water. They talked quietly, learning about each other in the flickering firelight. Thomas told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri before coming to Texas after the war. Jessamine spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her parents' illness, her journey west seeking a new beginning. "Seems we're both looking for fresh starts," Thomas observed. "And both running from something," Jessamine added softly. The storm showed no signs of abating as midnight approached. Wind shrieked around the cabin, and the rain fell in torrents. Thomas insisted Jessamine take the cot while he made do with a bedroll on the floor. "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her when she protested. Exhausted from the day's events, Jessamine lay down, but sleep eluded her. Each crash of thunder, each howl of wind made her start, imagining Crawford's men bursting through the door. After an hour of tossing and turning, she sat up. Thomas was still awake, sitting at the small table, cleaning his revolver by the light of the lantern. He looked up when she moved. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Jessamine shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Crawford's face." Thomas set the gun aside and moved to sit beside her on the cot, keeping a respectful distance. "You're safe here," he said gently. "I promise you that." "You barely know me," Jessamine said, studying his face in the dim light. "Why risk so much for a stranger?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I'm tired of watching men like Crawford take what they want without consequence. Maybe I've been looking for a reason to stand against him since my sister died." He paused. "Or maybe there's something about you that made it impossible for me to look the other way." The sincerity in his voice made Jessamine's heart skip a beat. Before she could respond, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the cabin, followed by the sound of splintering wood. They both jumped to their feet as part of the roof gave way, rain pouring in through a newly formed gap above the table. "Get back!" Thomas shouted as more of the roof began to collapse. He grabbed the lantern and pulled Jessamine toward the door, but before they could reach it, the entire ceiling buckled. Acting on instinct, Thomas threw himself over Jessamine as timber and debris rained down. When the crashing finally stopped, they found themselves huddled in the corner of the cabin, the only section where the roof remained intact. Rain poured in through the gaping hole, quickly soaking everything in the cabin. "Are you hurt?" Thomas asked, his voice raised to be heard over the storm. "No," Jessamine gasped, her heart racing. "Are you?" Thomas grimaced, touching his shoulder where a piece of timber had struck him. "Nothing serious." The cabin was no longer safe. The remaining section of roof could collapse at any moment. Thomas grabbed his saddlebags and gun belt, then wrapped his duster around Jessamine's shoulders. "We need to find better shelter," he shouted over the howling wind. "Where?" Jessamine cried, peering out at the storm-lashed darkness. "There's a small cave in the hillside not far from here. Hunters use it sometimes." They made a dash for the lean to where the horse was tethered, finding the animal nervous but unharmed. Thomas led the horse out into the storm, and they struggled through the driving rain toward a rocky outcropping barely visible in the darkness. The wind was ferocious, nearly knocking Jessamine off her feet. Thomas wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her steady as they trudged through mud and standing water. Lightning split the sky in blinding flashes, illuminating the landscape in stark relief before plunging them back into darkness. They reached the base of the hill, and Thomas guided them along its side until they found the cave entrance, a dark opening in the rock face just large enough to admit the horse. Inside, they were sheltered from the rain, though the wind still howled at the entrance. Thomas secured the nervous horse before helping Jessamine deeper into the cave. "We'll be safe here," he assured her, setting down the lantern. The warm light revealed a small, dry space that had clearly been used by travelers before. There was an old fire ring in the center and a stack of firewood against one wall. Thomas quickly built a fire, and they huddled close to the flames, their clothes soaked and their bodies chilled. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but within the cave, they were protected from its fury. "Thank you," Jessamine said, her teeth chattering as she pulled Thomas's duster tighter around herself. "You saved my life back there." "You would have done the same," Thomas replied, adding more wood to the fire. As the fire grew, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, they gradually began to warm. Thomas retrieved a blanket from his saddlebags and insisted Jessamine wrap it around herself. The storm's roar became a backdrop to their conversation as they talked to distract themselves from their precarious situation. Thomas spoke of his time as a ranch hand, the vast herds of cattle he'd helped drive north to the railheads in Kansas. Jessamine told him about learning to sew from her mother, about the satisfaction she found in creating beautiful garments from simple cloth. "I always dreamed of having my own dress shop someday," she confessed, staring into the flames. "Somewhere far from here, perhaps in San Francisco or even back east." "You still can," Thomas said. "Crawford doesn't own the whole world, just thinks he does." "But how?" Jessamine sighed. "I have nothing, no savings, no family to help me." "You have friends now," Thomas said quietly. "Me for one. And the Hendersons will take to you, I'm certain of it." Around midnight, the storm reached its peak. The wind screamed through the valley, and thunder crashed so loudly it seemed to shake the very earth. Rain fell in blinding sheets, turning the ground outside the cave into a rushing river of mud and debris. Jessamine huddled closer to Thomas, seeking comfort in his solid presence. He hesitated, then wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat like that, watching the fury of the storm from their shelter, drawing strength from each other's warmth. "I've never seen a storm like this," Jessamine whispered. "Texas weather, Thomas replied. Fierce as the land itself. As another thunderclap shook the cave, Jessamine flinched, and Thomas tightened his arm around her. Their eyes met in the firelight, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection forged in adversity. The storm tore through the valley at midnight. The cowboy held her close, whispering, "We'll survive together." Jessamine felt the tension leave her body at his words, allowing herself to believe, if only for that moment, that they would indeed make it through this night and whatever challenges lay ahead. As the night wore on, the storm gradually began to subside. The thunder grew more distant, the rain less intense. They took turns sleeping, one keeping watch while the other rested. When dawn finally broke, they emerged from the cave to find a landscape transformed. Trees toppled, the line shack a pile of splintered wood, the surrounding land scoured by the storm's fury. "Providence was with us last night," Thomas said, surveying the destruction. "If we'd stayed in that cabin." Jessamine nodded, unable to speak as she contemplated how close they had come to disaster. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the rain-washed landscape. Despite the devastation, there was a strange beauty to the scene, a reminder of nature's power and the fragility of human existence. They mounted Thomas's horse and continued their journey toward the Rocking H Ranch, picking their way carefully through the storm-ravaged terrain. The going was slow, but by mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and saw the ranch spread out before them, a cluster of buildings nestled in a green valley, smoke rising peacefully from the main house chimney. "Home," Thomas said with evident relief, "or the closest thing I have to one." As they approached the ranch, they were spotted by one of the hands, who rode out to meet them. "Tom, we were worried when you didn't come back last night." "Got caught in the storm," Thomas explained. "This is Miss Jessamine Vickers. She needs our help." Word of their arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main house, Sarah Henderson, the ranch owner's wife, was waiting on the porch. She was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair. Come in," she urged, ushering Jessamine inside. "You look half drowned, both of you." Within the hour, Jessamine found herself clean, dressed in borrowed clothes, and seated at the Hendersons' kitchen table with a bowl of hearty stew before her. Thomas sat across from her, having recounted their story to Robert Henderson, a gruff but fair-minded rancher who listened with growing concern. "Crawford's been pushing his boundaries for years," Henderson said, stroking his gray beard. "But abducting a woman that crosses a line even he shouldn't dare." "He'll come looking for her," Thomas warned. "He's not a man to let things go." "Let him come," Henderson replied, his voice hard. "The Rocking H isn't some frontier town he can intimidate. You're welcome here, Miss Vickers, for as long as you need." Jessamine's eyes filled with grateful tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Sarah Henderson said, patting her hand. "We take care of our own in these parts." "I can work," Jessamine offered. "I'm a skilled seamstress, and I can cook and clean as well." "We could use help with both," Sarah smiled. "The men are forever tearing their clothes, and I'm not as young as I once was." That evening, as Jessamine prepared for bed in the small room Sarah had given her, she heard a soft knock at the door. Thomas stood in the hallway, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Just wanted to check that you're settling in all right," he said. "Everyone has been very kind," Jessamine replied. "I can't thank you enough for bringing me here." Thomas nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I'll be heading out at first light tomorrow, going to scout the area. Make sure Crawford's men aren't close." Jessamine felt a pang of disappointment. "Will you be gone long?" "A day or two," he said. "Don't worry, you're safe here. The ranch hands are loyal to Henderson, and they'll protect you." "It's not that," Jessamine admitted. "I'll miss your company." A faint flush colored Thomas's cheeks. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. After he left, Jessamine stood at the window, looking out at the star-filled Texas sky. For the first time since fleeing Brownsville, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps here, among these good people, she could rebuild her life. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Jessamine helped Sarah with household chores during the day and spent evenings mending the ranch hands' clothing. The men were respectful and grateful for her skill with a needle, and she found herself enjoying their company and their stories of life on the range. True to his word, Thomas returned after 2 days, reporting no sign of Crawford's men in the area. "They might not know which way we headed," he said during dinner. "Or maybe they're lying low after the storm. Either way, we'll remain vigilant," Henderson declared. "I've sent word to some neighboring ranches to keep an eye out for strangers." As the days passed, Jessamine grew more comfortable at the Rocking H. She took on more responsibilities, helping Sarah with cooking and even assisting the ranch cook in preparing meals for the hands. Her nimble fingers and eye for detail made her a valuable asset, and Henderson offered her a modest salary for her work. Through it all, her friendship with Thomas deepened. He often sought her company in the evenings, and they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their hopes and dreams. Jessamine found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, and the gentle way he treated everyone around him. "Have you always wanted to be a cowboy?" she asked him one evening, as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Thomas chuckled. "Can't say I ever thought about it that way. After the war, I just needed work and I was good with horses. The rest sort of happened on its own." "You never wanted to settle down? Have a place of your own?" A wistful expression crossed his face. "Someday, maybe. I've been saving up to buy a small spread, nothing fancy. Just enough land to run some cattle, maybe grow some crops." "It sounds wonderful," Jessamine said sincerely. "What about you?" Thomas asked. "Still dreaming of that dress shop?" "I am," she nodded, "though it seems further away than ever now." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Dreams have a way of coming true when you least expect them to," he finally said. 2 weeks after their arrival at the ranch, the peace was shattered. Jessamine was hanging laundry in the yard when a ranch hand galloped in, his horse lathered with sweat. "Riders coming," he shouted. "Looks like Crawford's men, at least 6 of them." The ranch erupted into activity. Henderson ordered the women inside and positioned his men around the property. Thomas came to find Jessamine, his expression grave. "Stay with Sarah in the back room," he instructed. "Don't come out until one of us comes for you." "Thomas," Jessamine caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Please be careful." He covered her hand with his own. "I will," he promised, his eyes conveying what words could not. From the back bedroom window, Jessamine watched as Crawford's men rode into the ranch yard. Silas Crawford himself led them, his expensive clothes and well-groomed appearance at odds with the rough-looking gunmen who accompanied him. Henderson met them in front of the house, Thomas and several ranch hands flanking him, all armed. Though she couldn't hear the exchange, the tension was palpable even from a distance. Crawford gestured angrily, while Henderson stood his ground. When Crawford's hand moved toward his gun, every ranch hand raised their weapons in response. For a tense moment, it seemed violence was inevitable. Then, to Jessamine's surprise, Crawford lowered his hand. After a few more heated words, he and his men turned their horses and rode away. "They're gone," Sarah said with relief, watching from beside Jessamine. "For now, at least." When Henderson and Thomas entered the house a few minutes later, their expressions were grim. "Crawford claims he has legal grounds to take you back," Henderson explained to Jessamine. "Says you stole money from him before fleeing town." "That's a lie," Jessamine protested. I never took anything. We know, Thomas assured her. But Crawford has the local sheriff in his pocket. He's threatening to return with legal papers. What can we do? Jessamine asked, her heart sinking. Henderson and Thomas exchanged a look. We think it's time you moved on, Henderson said gently. Not because we don't want you here, but for your own safety. I'll take you, Thomas added, north to New Mexico territory. Crawford's influence doesn't reach that far. When? Jessamine asked, trying to absorb this sudden change of plans. Tonight, Thomas said, under cover of darkness. Crawford will be watching the roads, but I know trails through the hills that his men won't know about. Preparations were made quickly and quietly. Sarah packed food and supplies while Henderson provided money and a letter of introduction to a friend in Santa Fe. As dusk fell, Thomas saddled 2 horses his own and a gentle mare for Jessamine. Are you sure about this? Jessamine asked Thomas as they prepared to depart. You're giving up your position here, your friends. Some things are more important, Thomas replied simply. Besides, I've been thinking about moving on anyway. Maybe New Mexico is where I'll find that land I've been dreaming about. They said their goodbyes to the Hendersons, with promises to write once they were safely settled. As night descended, they rode out from the ranch, taking a little used trail that led into the hills west of the property. Crawford will be watching the main roads north, Thomas explained as they rode. We'll head west first, then north once we're clear of his men. They traveled through the night, keeping a steady pace. Jessamine, who had never spent much time on horseback before coming to the ranch, was grateful for Sarah Henderson's riding lessons over the past 2 weeks. Even so, by dawn, her muscles ached, and she was grateful when Thomas called a halt in a sheltered canyon. We'll rest here for a few hours, he said, helping her dismount. Then push on this evening. As they shared a simple breakfast of jerky and biscuits, Jessamine studied the man who had risked so much for her. In the 2 weeks at the ranch, she had come to know Thomas Everett as a man of few words but deep convictions, someone who could be trusted to keep his word and stand by his principles, no matter the cost. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Any of it. From the moment you helped me escape Brownsville, you've put yourself in danger for my sake. Thomas met her gaze steadily. I did what any decent man would do. No, Jessamine shook her head. Most men would have looked the other way. It would have been easier. Easier isn't always right, Thomas replied. After a pause, he added more softly. And somewhere along the way, keeping you safe became important to me. More important than I expected. The admission hung between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Before Jessamine could respond, the sound of a twig snapping nearby brought them both to alert. Thomas reached for his rifle, gesturing for Jessamine to stay behind him. Well, a familiar voice drawled. Isn't this cozy? Silas Crawford stepped into view, a pistol aimed at Thomas. Behind him, 2 of his men emerged from the brush, their rifles trained on the couple. How did you find us? Thomas demanded, his rifle half raised. You think you're the only one who knows these hills, cowboy? Crawford sneered. Drop the gun, or my men will shoot the lady. Thomas hesitated, then slowly set his rifle on the ground. Crawford smiled, a cold, calculated expression that sent chills down Jessamine's spine. Miss Vickers, he said, turning his attention to her. You've led me on quite a chase. Time to come home now. I'm not going anywhere with you, Jessamine replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Crawford's smile vanished. You don't have a choice. Your cowboy friend here is about to have an unfortunate accident, and you'll be a grief-stricken witness to a tragic robbery gone wrong. No, Jessamine moved to stand in front of Thomas. If you hurt him, I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. Crawford laughed. And who would believe you? A woman with no family, no connections? Against me? He gestured to his men. Take care of the cowboy. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion. Thomas shoved Jessamine aside as Crawford's men raised their rifles. In the same motion, he drew a small revolver from his boot, a weapon Crawford had overlooked. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession, and both of Crawford's men fell. Crawford fired his own pistol, the bullet grazing Thomas's arm. Before he could fire again, Thomas launched himself at the man, tackling him to the ground. They struggled for the gun, rolling in the dirt as Jessamine watched in horror. A final shot echoed through the canyon. For a terrible moment, Jessamine couldn't tell who had fired or who had been hit. Then Thomas rose slowly to his feet, Crawford's gun in his hand. Crawford himself lay motionless on the ground, blood spreading across his expensive vest. Thomas! Jessamine rushed to his side, examining the wound on his arm. You're hurt. It's just a scratch, he assured her, though his face was pale. He looked down at Crawford's body, no satisfaction in his expression, only a grim sort of finality. It's over. They buried Crawford and his men in shallow graves, marking the locations so the bodies could be properly recovered later. Thomas insisted on saying a few words over each grave, despite everything the men had done. Doesn't seem right to leave anyone without a prayer, he explained when Jessamine questioned him. Even men like these. They continued their journey north, more cautious now, avoiding towns and keeping to the wilderness. Thomas taught Jessamine how to shoot his spare pistol, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself. I hope you never have to use it, he said as she practiced aiming at a distant tree. But out here, it's better to be prepared. 5 days after leaving the Rocking H, they crossed into New Mexico territory. The landscape changed, becoming more rugged, with towering mesas and deep canyons. The air was clearer, the sky seemingly larger than it had been in Texas. It's beautiful, Jessamine remarked as they made camp one evening, looking out over a valley painted in shades of red and gold by the setting sun. It is, Thomas agreed, joining her. Different from Texas, but beautiful in its own way. They had grown closer during their journey, the shared dangers and hardships forging a bond between them that transcended mere friendship. Each night as they sat by the campfire, they learned more about each other's hopes, fears, the small details that make up a life. Thomas spoke of his childhood on the Missouri farm, his father's death in a farming accident, his mother struggling to raise him and his sister alone. He told her about joining the Union Army at 18, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, the emptiness he'd felt upon returning home to find his mother had died of fever in his absence. Jessamine shared stories of her own happy memories of her parents before illness took them, the struggle to support herself afterward, her decision to head west in search of opportunity. She confessed her fears of never finding a place to belong, of always being alone in a world that could be cruel to women without protection. You're not alone anymore, Thomas told her, reaching across the fire to take her hand. Whatever happens when we reach Santa Fe, I want you to know that. In Santa Fe, they found Henderson's friend, a merchant named William Parker who welcomed them warmly. Parker offered Thomas work in his freight business and helped Jessamine secure a position with a local dressmaker. You have quite a talent, Mrs. Delaney, the dressmaker, told Jessamine after seeing samples of her work. I've been looking for an assistant with your skills for months. Within weeks, they had established themselves in the community. Thomas rented a small house on the outskirts of town, insisting Jessamine stay there while he took a room above the livery stable. It wouldn't be proper for us to live under the same roof, he explained. People talk, and I won't have your reputation damaged. Jessamine was touched by his consideration, though part of her wished he wasn't quite so proper. Their feelings for each other had grown during their journey, but Thomas maintained a respectful distance, never presuming more than friendship, despite the obvious connection between them. 3 months after their arrival in Santa Fe, Thomas came to call on Jessamine one Sunday afternoon. He was dressed in his best clothes, clean denims, a pressed shirt, and a new hat. In his hands, he nervously turned a small package. "I have something for you," he said when she invited him in. "A gift of sorts." Curious, Jessamine unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound book, a ledger with elegant gold lettering on the cover. "Vickers Dressmaking." "I don't understand," she said, looking up at Thomas in confusion. "There's a vacant shop on Alameda Street," he explained. "Parker helped me secure the lease. It needs some work, but with a little effort, it could be a fine dress shop." Jessamine stared at him, speechless with surprise. "Thomas, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not charity," he said quickly. "It's an investment. Parker and I both believe in your talent. The lease is paid for 6 months. After that, you can buy it outright from the profits." Tears filled Jessamine's eyes as she realized what he had done. He had remembered her dream and found a way to make it possible. "I don't know what to say." Thomas took a deep breath. "Say you'll marry me." Jessamine's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "I love you, Jessamine," Thomas said, the words rushing out as if he'd held them back too long. "I think I have since that night in the storm when I promised we'd survive together. We have survived more than that, we've thrived. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Jessamine set the ledger aside and stepped closer to him. "Is that why you got the shop? So I would marry you?" Thomas looked horrified. "No, the shop is yours whether you accept me or not. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not good with words. I wanted to show you that I support your dreams, that I would never ask you to give them up." The sincerity in his eyes melted any doubts Jessamine might have had. She reached up to touch his face gently. "I love you too, Thomas. Yes, I'll marry you." The relief and joy that spread across his features were beautiful to behold. He pulled her into his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that held the promise of all their tomorrows. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the local church, with William Parker and his wife as witnesses. Jessamine wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery, while Thomas looked handsome and somewhat uncomfortable in a new suit. "You clean up nicely, Cowboy," she teased him as they walked back to their new home together. "Don't get used to it," he replied with a grin. "These fancy duds aren't made for ranch work." The shop on Alameda Street opened the following month. Vickers Dressmaking quickly gained a reputation for quality and style, drawing customers from throughout Santa Fe and beyond. Jessamine hired 2 assistants to help with the increasing workload, teaching them her techniques and designs. Thomas, meanwhile, continued working for Parker while saving to buy land outside town. His dream of owning a small ranch remained strong, and with Jessamine's success, it seemed more achievable than ever. Their life together was not without challenges. News reached them that Crawford's brother had taken over his business interests in Texas and was asking questions about his death. For several tense weeks, they feared he might track them to Santa Fe, but the danger eventually passed. Thomas's occasional nightmares about the war and the men he'd killed, including Crawford, were harder to overcome. On the nights when he woke gasping for breath, Jessamine would hold him close, reminding him that he was a good man who had done what was necessary to protect those he loved. "The past is past," she would whisper. "We look forward now, not back." A year after their arrival in Santa Fe, Thomas's dream came true. He purchased a small ranch 10 miles outside town, 300 acres of good grazing land with a sturdy house, a barn, and a year-round stream. "It needs work," he admitted as he showed Jessamine around the property. "The house especially, but it's ours, free and clear." "It's perfect," Jessamine declared, seeing not what the ranch was but what it could become. "Our own piece of the world." They balanced their time between the ranch and the dress shop, with Thomas handling the ranch work and Jessamine continuing to build her business in town. It was a busy life but a fulfilling one, their love deepening with each passing season. In the spring of their second year in New Mexico, Jessamine shared news that brought Thomas to happy tears. They were expecting a child. As her belly swelled with new life, she cut back on her hours at the shop, training her lead assistant to manage in her absence. "I want our child to know both worlds," she told Thomas as they sat on the porch of their ranch house one evening, watching the sunset, the excitement of town and the peace of the ranch. "Our child will have the best of everything," Thomas promised, his hand resting protectively on her rounded stomach, "including the best mother a child could ask for." Their daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Everett, was born on a crisp autumn morning, named for the woman who had shown them such kindness at the Rocking H. She had Thomas's dark hair and Jessamine's blue eyes, and from her first cry, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny fingers. Life settled into a new rhythm with Sarah's arrival. The dress shop continued to thrive under Jessamine's direction, even as she devoted herself to motherhood. Thomas expanded the ranch operations, breeding horses in addition to raising cattle. Their home became known for its warm hospitality, with friends and neighbors gathering regularly for Sunday dinners. When Sarah was 2, a letter arrived from Texas. It was from Robert Henderson, bringing news that Silas Crawford's brother had been killed in a gambling dispute, ending any lingering threat to Thomas and Jessamine. The letter also extended an invitation to visit the Rocking H, assuring them they would be welcome. "Should we go?" Jessamine asked Thomas that evening. "It would be good for Sarah to meet the people who helped us when we needed it most." Thomas considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Yes," he finally decided. "It's time to stop looking over our shoulders. Texas is part of our story, the beginning of our story together." The journey back to Texas was different from their flight 3 years earlier. They traveled in a comfortable wagon with 4-year-old Sarah chattering excitedly between them. The landscape that had once seemed threatening now appeared merely vast and beautiful. Their reception at the Rocking H was joyous. Sarah Henderson wept as she held her namesake, and Robert clapped Thomas on the back with pride. The ranch hands who remembered Thomas welcomed him like a returning brother. "You've done well for yourselves?" Henderson observed as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching Sarah play with the ranch dogs. "Found your place in the world." "Thanks to you," Jessamine said. "We wouldn't have had the chance without your help." Henderson waved away her gratitude. "You made your own way. All we did was give you a starting point." On their last night at the ranch, a storm blew in from the west. Thunder rolled across the valley, and rain lashed against the windows of the main house. The sudden tempest brought back vivid memories of that first night when Thomas had held Jessamine close in the cave, promising they would survive together. As lightning illuminated the room, Thomas found Jessamine standing at the window, watching the storm. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Reminds me of another storm," he murmured. "The night everything changed." Jessamine leaned back against him, covering his hands with her own. "I was just thinking the same thing. I was so scared that night, not just of Crawford, but of the future of being alone." "And now?" Thomas asked. Jessamine turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them over the years. "Now I know we can weather any storm, as long as we're together." Outside, the storm raged on, but within the walls of the Henderson home, Thomas and Jessamine found shelter in each other's arms, just as they had that night in the cave. Their journey had taken them through danger and uncertainty to a place of love and security neither had dared to dream possible. As they returned to their New Mexico ranch, they brought with them renewed appreciation for the life they had built together. The dress shop in Santa Fe continued to flourish, eventually becoming one of the most prestigious establishments in the territory. The ranch prospered under Thomas's careful management, growing to include not just cattle and horses, but crops as well. Sarah grew into a spirited young woman with her father's quiet strength and her mother's creative eye. She was joined by two brothers, Robert Thomas and James William, completing the family that had begun on that stormy night when a cowboy and a seamstress fled into the unknown together. Years later, long after their hair had turned gray and their steps had slowed, Thomas and Jessamine would sit on the porch of their ranch house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They would sometimes speak of those early days, the flight from Brownsville, the storm that had nearly claimed their lives, the journey to a new beginning in New Mexico. "We've been blessed," Thomas would say, his weathered hand clasping Jessamine's. And Jessamine would smile, remembering the words whispered in a storm-ravaged valley all those years ago. "We survived together," she would reply, "just like you promised we would." In the end, that was their legacy, not just the successful businesses or the thriving ranch or even their children and grandchildren, but the love that had begun in adversity and grown stronger with each passing year. A love born in a storm, tested by fire, and ultimately triumphant against all odds. A love that, like the rugged land they had made their home, endured,